Hi everyone, welcome to Desert Sage Podcast. I'm your host Greg Bedford, coming to you on the 8th of August 2023 from Dogtown Lake, just outside of Williams, Arizona. If you don't know where Williams is, it's just off of 40 east of Kingman. Some people consider it the gateway to the Grand Canyon. I've been up there to the Grand Canyon via the railroad several times. A beautiful area. If you ever get a chance to get up here, I'd highly recommend it. Right now it's about 30 degrees hotter where we live than it is right now here, which is why we're here. Been up here for a little over a week now. And we had to kind of suspend our outdoor garden project. It just got too hot and kind of had to shift our focus inside where it was cooler. It just became intolerable to, even in the early mornings, to get outside and work. You just can't do it where we live. So we shifted our attention indoors. And some of you may know, based on Facebook post, that I've been working on for many months now, working on the investigation of the death of my sister, which, as many of you already know, is due to what I believe is the biological agent masquerading as one of these. And I'm trying not to get myself kicked off of any more platforms than I have to, but I'm convinced of that. So I've been spending a great deal of time doing research, medical research, looking up the most recent case studies and trials. I've gone over, like you would during any investigation, and that's basically what I've been doing here, is conducting an investigation. And you do the best you can to take the emotion out of it. And what I've had to do over the last several months is pour over police reports, coroner's reports, medical examiner reports. In other words, VAERS reports. I've submitted her case to VAERS and received a response from them, an emergency response, due to the lot number of the vaccines that she had taken. Been over medical records, spent a great deal of time, looking into gathering all the information that I could. Basically using that TRIVIUM project that I talked about, or that TRIVIUM method that I talked about before. You gather all the information that you can, like any investigation, and then the next step is sorting through the logical fallacies, the inconsistencies, and the contradictions, in order to sift out or find the truth. And then the very end is the wisdom aspect, or acting on what you know. And that's what wisdom is acting on what you know. And once I gathered all of that information, I'd not said anything to my immediate family other than my other sister, my wife, and her husband, my niece and nephew, that I was going to be going down this road, because none of it made sense. She was classified as one of those died suddenly people, and none of her medical history, clinical information, the information that we had up to and including the time of her death, toxicology reports, the coroner's report, none of it added up to a cause of death of cardiomegaly. So if you don't know what that means, that's basically an enlarged heart. It's a pretty general common term with an associated factor or a secondary cause of myocarditis and emphysema. because she smoked. So after spending hours and hours and hours reviewing those reports, all that information, looking at the most recent clinical information on the correlation between the biological agent masquerading as one of these and myocarditis particularly, I started looking at and I had to wait for studies and clinical trials, and unfortunately the adverse effects of the rollout of this fraud and democide. Just now there's more and more information has been coming out, including congressional testimony that I've posted before, information from actuaries. Go look at Ed Dowd's work, on the increase in all-cause mortality in 21 and 22. Go look at his work on increased in disabilities. Working age people. Statistically, and that's what we're talking about, is gathering data and running statistical analysis on all of that data, to discover, that there's incredible increases in the death, disabilities, cancer rates, miscarriages, fertility problems. And so I'd encourage you to go look at that information from Ed Dowd at, I think it's Finance, PHINANCE Inc. Go look at his work. Look at the work of Dr. Peter McCulloch and his colleagues. So I've been spending a lot of time linking the biological agent, again, that we know now has been manufactured, has been weaponized. Gain of function, for those of you that aren't familiar with that term, when I post that congressional testimony where Fauci lied about gain of function, basically what that means is it's been weaponized. The coronavirus, which isn't a novel virus at all, it's been around forever. They've been studying it and weaponizing it since the 60s and 70s, to include mRNA vaccinations, for the SARS-CoV virus. So I've been, doing all this research, and so I haven't posted any content for quite a while yet. And I have to tell you, going through this, I've investigated many, homicides, to include, suicide homicides. I've been to many autopsies, many unknown cause death investigations that, on the surface, when you get there, doesn't turn out to be anything what you initially thought it was going to be. So it's not like I'm not talking from experience here. So I looked at all this data, and I got to tell you, it takes a toll, an emotional toll. So we're up here for a variety of reasons right now. One, to get out of the heat, but two, to heal. To heal emotionally, and there's no better way to do it than to be out in nature. But I also needed to heal physically. I recently had eye surgery. It was, fairly intensive. Which is why again I'm wearing the sunglasses. I can't get dust and that kind of stuff in there, and I'm real sensitive to light right now. So I'm a week out post-op now. We've been up here a week, and part of it was coming up here was for me to heal physically. as well as emotionally. It was very difficult, for me to dust off skill sets that I haven't used in many, many years. It's one thing to do it for somebody you're not close to, and it's another thing to go through that with a family member, your sister in my case. So I needed to come up here to heal. And part of what I want to talk about today is the term myopic and vision. And last podcast I talked about the distinction between intuition and instinct, and talked about how intuition was a higher form of knowing. And if you follow some of my posts and my content, I've also talked about my study of ancient mystery traditions, including Vedic traditions involving the pineal gland, or the third eye. And I've posted some content on Facebook and actually got some surprising positive responses from people over it. And I mentioned how the pineal gland, or the third eye, has been one of the most poisoned in the human body through the use of fluoride and other chemicals. If you do the research, look at the history of the use of fluoride, it's a byproduct of aluminum, and what it does to the brain. And the pineal gland, in many cases, for most people, has been calcified. It's been poisoned, in essence. And it doesn't allow you, we talk about the term myopic. Basically it means, distorted view, nearsightedness, lack of foresight, that kind of thing, internal intuition or knowledge. That term applies to, myopic applies to that, but also applies to, in a physical sense, to nearsightedness. So it has several meanings, like most words. And what I want to talk about today is how most people are extremely myopic. They lack imagination. And I'll give you an example. We came up here camping, and my wife and I are fairly social people, and so we met a group of 3 couples. They had kids, teenagers, ranging down to little kids, 5, 6 years old. Seemed like nice people to come over, introduce themselves. It was mid-afternoon. Started their generator. It was running, until 10 o'clock at night, and then they shut it down like they're supposed to. Started up the next day, 7 o'clock, ran all day. Thinking, why are they, running this? Well, they come to find out they had a Mr. Coffee pot, but wouldn't account for running all day long. Ultimately, we discovered that their teenage kids were inside the tent all the time, playing video games or watching movies. The parents, when they were outside, didn't sound like they were drinking a whole lot, but they were throwing out, the fuck this and all that in front of, small children and teenagers and stuff. And it, I thought, these parents, a lot of them aren't thinking, they're not conscious about their parenting, first of all. They're very myopic, and that they're only concerned about the things that are important to them at that moment. They had no consideration about the other campers around them and the noise, but also the impact that they were having on their kids, and the fact that they brought them out here to go camping when you could have stayed at home and played video games on Saturday over the weekend. You could have done that shit at home. But back to the lack of imagination. We've also talked to several people while we were up here, couples about our age, mostly. When we were out on the Razor, we got to meet some people. And I intentionally like to start up conversations, find out where their level of consciousness really is. And so sometimes I'll steer the conversation towards things like what their viewpoint is on 9/11, or most recently COVID-19. And real quickly, I can size up their level of consciousness, based on whether or not they give me the official narrative version of what occurred both on 9/11 and or COVID-19. And I'll talk to them, and we'll get to in a conversation. I'll ask them about it, and they'll say, "Yeah, that was crazy. That whole COVID, business. That was crazy, man. But I'm glad things are back to normal now, and I'm glad I got my shot, so I could travel." And which tells me something else. If they were willing to be a guinea pig and volunteer to have an unknown biological agent injected into their body in order to be able to travel. Oh, and I heard other reasons as well. It wasn't just ridiculous things like that, but so you get to talking to people, and I started giving them my version of what has occurred, and the fact that if you start looking at historically, that our U.S. government, particularly the Department of Defense, starting in World War II, when we brought back a whole lot of Nazi doctors and scientists, including Werner von Braun and the rocket program, and all of them under Operation Paperclip. You start talking to them about the history of biological warfare and what our government, particularly the Department of Defense, Pentagon, which you can differentiate from the people that are in the uniformed folks in the military. Those people at DOD, National Security Council, Pentagon, those are the high level people, at the apex of that pyramid that I've talked about, that power structure, that hierarchical and compartmentalized power structure that exists in almost every organization, all the way from corporations down to military, to law enforcement agency. If you imagine a pyramid, and the people at the top of that pyramid, are the ones that have the real knowledge about the true agenda of what's going on. Everybody else below that is compartmentalized and doesn't. And that knowledge gap creates a power differential. I've talked about this many times. So you get to talking to people about this, and they can't imagine, they can't imagine people being so evil that that these biological warfare programs that our Department of Defense and DARPA and BARDA and NIAID and USAID and all these other institutions have been involved in would ever conduct, experiments on our military people, on our soldiers. Can't imagine that they would also conduct experiments, biological experiments, biological chemical warfare experiments on our own populations. They can't imagine that. I've talked about psychopaths, particularly those that are the apex predators at the very top of the pyramid structure, the ones that understand the true agenda, and everybody else below them has no knowledge of what is occurring, unless you get up into the higher part of that apex. Happens in every organization, and I talked about corporations and the military and all that. These are macrocosms, but you could take it all the way down to small mom and pop grocery stores, or even your own household on a microcosmic level. Mom and dad know what's going on, but the kids, generally are shielded from, the information about things that might harm them. And in the case of corporations or, businesses and stuff, generally it's only those people, again, at the top that really know what's going on, and the worker bees and, those below at the bottom of the pyramid are kept in the dark in many cases. I've used the example of the Manhattan Project, before, the development of the atomic bomb. There were thousands of people involved in that, but everybody was so compartmentalized that nobody knew what the other folks were doing at the next level up or down on the scale. That's how compartmentalized everybody was. And so people can't imagine how these things could take place, these what quote unquote conspiracies, which are, we're not talking about really conspiracies. What we're talking about are agendas, and the conspiracies take place at various different levels along the pyramid. If you can imagine the brick structures of pyramids, they take place at various different levels, but nobody really knows what's going on at the higher levels except those at the very top. Again, it creates that power differential. Those with the knowledge. So, and so when you start explaining these things to people, you have to start with history. And our government, folks, like it or not, ever since after World War II, when we brought a lot of the Nazi scientists and doctors over, who, by the way, had been experimenting on their own people long before the people in the concentration camps. They had been experimenting through eugenics to get rid of the undesirables, those with, disorders, people with schizophrenia and all kinds of physical defects. The Nazi doctors were the first ones involved in eugenics on their own people, in order to create the master race, and eliminate the undesirables. So and then you walk people through how these organizations, DARPA, DOD, Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, and some of these other ones, over the years have set up these structures where they have allowed pharmaceutical companies to develop vaccines. The CDC has approved these, the FDA has approved products. You start explaining to people how often the CDC and the FDA have been involved in, lawsuits because of they're not doing their job of oversight like they're supposed to. And then you find out that, they have been experimenting with COVID or the SARS-CoV virus since the 60s and 70s, learning how to weaponize it. Also, on a parallel path, learning how to create vaccines or, cures for the agents that they were creating. And you take them all the way up to the present day, where you find out that the last pandemic that we went through wasn't anything at all like that we were told that it was. And that over the years, you take people up through the swine flu and how everybody was supposed to be vaccinated over that one. And then you go into 2010 and you point them to the Rockefeller Foundation, the lockstep document that was created for them, and how they've been working on this pandemic response and the implementation and deployment of vaccines as, sorry folks, part of a eugenics program. Nothing has changed. They've just developed the technology. And like I've mentioned before, our governments now just have a tendency into, instead of killing, people with, force with guns and bullets, this is a silent war. It's one that's psychological, it's spiritual, it's emotional, it's physical. They've been poisoning our food, our air, our water, our medicine for a long time. So part of the reason that I'm out here is for me, nature's the answer to many things. The Creator gave us this university to learn from. And after He's done creating it, He created us. He said, study this. Learn from it. All you need to know has been given to you. Observe. So coming out here, we've had an opportunity to, I guess for me to heal. And I needed to heal before I could continue this walk and talk or any other ones. I had some internal issues that I had to resolve. And nature gives us everything we need to heal as well, including medicine. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a place for allopathic medicine, and they've done a tremendous job in terms of, treating trauma, particularly, and I'm very thankful for that, by the way. But when it comes to chronic disease like cancer and, diabetes and, a lot of these, they'll never come up with a cure, intentionally. They're not supposed to. There's no money in that. And so when you start pointing out to people who don't have the imagination to see how all of this could unfold, and how these interests, including the money interests, and how many billions of dollars were, and how many new billionaires were created as a result of this. How many cities and counties and states were incentivized to go along with the narrative. Doctors, hospitals. Look at the money that hospitals made as a result of going along with the narrative. So we can look back now over the last several years in retrospect, if you haven't figured out what was going on here. And again, I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm not saying I'm still learning. And when I speculate, I try to admit that I'm speculating about a lot of these things. That's not what is happening here. I have both direct and circumstantial evidence to support my assertion that my sister's death was not natural cause and wasn't or the manner of death was not natural, and that the cause was not cardiomegaly. I'm not going to spend much more time on that, but I've come up here and I wanted to put out there on the table that I suffer just like a lot of other people suffer. I'm still learning like a lot of other people are learning. But I've had an opportunity to help develop that insight, that intuition, through my desire to know the truth. It started with that. I'd recognized a long time ago that we had been lied to about just about everything, and I had a strong desire to discover the truth about everything, including my former religion, my study, Christianity, in the past, all of those things, everything that we've been told. And I've come to the very painful conclusion that there's some real evil psychopathic fucks out there who are dead set on eliminating a large portion of humanity's population. And go back and look at all the documents and the history on eugenics. See, the problem is a lot of people have a tendency to whack away at the symptoms, at the branches of the tree instead of at the roots of the problem, because they fail to do a proper diagnosis of what the real problem is here. And the same thing happens in modern medicine. They treat the symptoms. They don't get to the root cause. They don't treat the person holistically. And again, the Creator has given us everything that we need to heal ourselves. And there's an abundance of resources, much to the chagrin and consternation of those people who claim that we're running out of resources and that there are too many people. And you might talk to people that that have that worldview. It's a poison worldview. Just like those people that believe that we're evil by nature, the fall of man, all of that. We're neither, and I've said it many times, we're neither good nor bad, but what we are is programmable. And we've been programmed and manipulated to believe a lot of shit that just isn't true. So, a lot of it begins with you know, with these people, and you start laying this out, and you can start seeing, you know, the wheels turning, and then, you know, it hits us like, well, the comments that come out of their mouth are something similar to, well, I can't imagine being that evil. You know, I would never think of something like that. I would never do that. Well, just because you would not think that way, you know, doesn't mean that there aren't people who do. And I'm telling you, through my experience, that there are. And I'm not talking about the psychopaths that you put in your mind, you know, the people that you visualize, you know, Ted Bundy and the mass shooters and, you know, some gang member, that kind of thing. No, the real psychopaths, the ones, you know, that I'm familiar with, are much higher up on that food chain, and they dress in suits and black robes and uniforms, and, you know, they're politicians and the people that you put an illegitimate belief in the authority in many cases. You know, the same thing goes for people who can't imagine changing. You know, I can only see, you know, the people that you know, know me, or think that they know me on a personal level. That oh, I know you, you know, Greg Befford. You know, people don't change. You're still the same person that you always were. People don't change. You're not going to evolve, you know, beyond, you know, me at the level that I'm at, or anybody else. That's not possible, because I wouldn't change. That's the truth of the matter. Because you don't believe that in the ability to change, you know, you project that onto other people. Well, change isn't possible. That's part of that victim mentality that most people have. You know, I'm destined to be who I am right now and not evolve beyond that. You know, so, you know, the ability to see, not just with your physical senses, you know, your eyes, obviously those are limited, and we've talked about the limitations on our five senses. You know, what I'm talking about is the ability to develop that intuition. You know, open that third eye, that pineal gland, so that truth can come through. Right now, for most people, the truth is distorted. Their pineal gland is calcified. You know, they can't see the truth. All they can see is what they've been programmed, you know, by their boob tube or their fondle box to believe. There are other ways of knowing, and that involves, you know, look, I've talked about this before too. We've got Alexandra's library here, and I'm talking about the internet. If you're getting your information from mainstream media, any source, I don't care, you know, left, right leaning, it doesn't matter. If you're getting, you know, the bulk of your information from those sources, you're being manipulated, propagandized, deceived, whether you believe it or not. You have no idea the capabilities of the people that you're dealing with in terms of their sorcery, their ability to understand the human psyche and manipulate it like the masses, as you saw during, you know, the COVID fiasco, the fraud. The target was always the vaccine. You know, and you talk to people about this, and they say, well, I can imagine, you know, people being able to conspire on that level. And, you know, then you talk to them about compartmentalization, and you get them to visualize a pyramid and all the bricks in it, and that how the people at the very top have 360-degree perception of what's going on. They have that kind of vision available, where if you're a brick in that pyramid, you're limited in your perception about the reality of what's occurring. And so you start to explain to people, you know, look, Because just because you wouldn't, believe that there are evil people, psychopathic people out there, doesn't mean they don't exist, because they do, and they are not the people that that conjure up in your mind's eye when I talk about psychopaths. Particularly, again, those apex predators are on that dominance hierarchy, and it goes all the way down to those people at the very, very bottom. And each and every one of us has a certain degree of psychopathy in us, whether you want to admit it or not. People say, "Oh, I can never, kill another, person. I can never do this. I can never do that." And then you start, putting scenarios out there that involve their family or their kids, and then you see how rapidly they contradict themselves in terms of what it is exactly that they would do to somebody that would cause harm, to their family member or to them, personally. So we all have a little bit of that in us. The challenge is to control the psychopath in us. Bring it out when you need to. People that are in the military, particularly a lot of the special forces and law enforcement and tactical, guys, understand when it's time to bring out, that warrior, that psychopath in you. When I used to train officers, on whether it's firearms or defensive tactics or less lethal force options, before they'd ever get to pick up a baton or take anybody to the ground or fire around, we spent a great deal of time in the classroom understanding the psychological dynamics of force continuum, use of force, because they would be of no value. It's one thing to teach them, when to employ a certain, weapon and how to use it and whatnot. But if they've never conditioned their minds to take another, human life, or they find themselves in a crisis situation, and they've never trained themselves mentally to deal with it, to visualize, use, neuro-linguistic programming and things of that nature to visualize, these events, make it as realistic as possible. Well, then chances are, if they've never gone through the mental training like they're supposed to, when it comes down to it, when the shit hits the fan, then they're likely to overreact, use too much force, underreact, get shot, killed themselves because they failed to respond, or freeze, all those things. But to relate it to myopathy, and being myopic, in high stress situations, we have had a term in law enforcement and the military called tunnel vision. It's the same thing. Your inability to override the physiological things that are happening to you, slow your breathing down and things of that nature, break that mind-body, cycle, and that kind of thing. If you never prepared yourselves, to do that, chances are you weren't going to be real effective for the other officers, the other soldiers, or the citizens that you were supposed to be protecting. So, tunnel vision can be caused by, a high stress or traumatic, situation, as I'd mentioned before with the concept of tunnel vision with military and law enforcement. But it also can be caused by filters that we put in front of our mind's eye, beliefs that we have, belief systems that are in place since we were small kids all the way up until we are, early 60s like I am now. Those belief systems are filters that prevent us from seeing truth, prevent our mind's eye from understanding the reality of what's occurring around us. And the reality is, folks, and I'm going to be honest about this, is that many people don't want to see the truth for a variety of reasons. The truth is too painful. I've talked about this many times. They'd rather put their head in the sand, and I don't want it to destroy my belief and my comfortable reality. In many cases, they don't want to admit their own complicitness, in causing harm to other people by their job or their profession. And in many cases, they don't want to accept the truth because then they'd be responsible. That's another reason why they close off, intuition, the third eye, that connection that we have with Source, with God, with the all, universal consciousness, whatever it is that you want to ascribe to that which is unknowable. But yet we want to have a tendency to give the Creator human attributes, anthropomorphize the Creator. I won't get into that now. I've done that before. But lack of imagination, this myopathy that I talked about before, is one of the reasons why we are in the state that we're in. Again, not the only reason. People have a tendency to want to see only, what they want to believe. Talked about that. But I've also talked about ignorance, apathy, and cowardice as well. The Tin Man, the Lion, and the Scarecrow. From Wizard of Oz, the allegory. People don't want to know the truth. People enjoy their slavery. And that's the truth. People enjoy having, big mommy government, big daddy government telling them what to do, or the experts, because again, they can avoid responsibility. They can be blissfully ignorant, live in their own reality, because, see, if it doesn't affect them, which is, leads to the next part, which is apathy. If it doesn't affect them, most people don't give a shit. When all the things about COVID were coming out, I didn't just start investigating. My sister, she died last year. I was out in front of the COVID thing long before that, because it was wrong. It wasn't about left or right or anti-mask, pro-mask. It was about right and wrong. But if it doesn't affect people, including law enforcement and military, it wasn't until they were being mandated to take this thing that they stood up and started pushing back, and many of them lost their jobs for it. I understand that, and I have much respect for those people, who stood their ground, and nurses and doctors and others who didn't bow down to what was occurring. Much respect for them. They saw what was happening and saw the censorship and all those things that were unfolding. They knew things were wrong, as most people did. They knew something was wrong, but because they haven't developed that intuition, they haven't aligned themselves with truth, they're still living in deception, still biting, the official narrative, listening to the talking heads, spoon feed you knowledge. When again, we have Alexander's library for the moment, with the internet. Learn how to use it. Learn how to search. Learn how to use the internet as a tool to do your research. And do your research. If you haven't picked up on it here now, folks, we don't have the luxury of being intellectually lazy about what's happening to this country. We don't have that luxury. What I'm trying to do is get people, again, to question their beliefs, those filters that prevent you from seeing the reality of what's occurring around us. As evil and as distasteful as it might sound, if you ignore it, it's only going to continue to perpetuate. It's not going away. And quit waiting for somebody to come and save us. whether it's a religious figure or a politician. It starts with you, but you have to want to know the truth. It starts with that desire, that drive to want to know the truth, to stop embracing the lie and accepting the truth, both about the things that you believed and the things that are happening now in front of us, because they're trying to fuck with our reality every single day. Change the narrative, change the language, definitions, all of those things, confuse the gender issue. One of the 7 hermetic principles, gender, that I talked about, before. And it's about those that are at the very top are part of a death cult. Is my opinion and the conclusions that I've come to. There's been secret societies that have existed, for a long time. Some were there that were doing light work, which were designed to enlighten, humanity. And there are others, obviously, that were dark in nature and were designed to destroy humanity. What we've witnessed and what I've contended here during several of these past walk and talks is that these are crimes against humanity that we've been experiencing here. No different than they did during, Nazi Germany and after World War II during the Nuremberg trials. No different. No different. When you put together everything that occurred, everything from lying about the origins of this thing to the protocols and the treatment and the use of ivermectin and how they suppressed that and hydroxychloroquine, and then started going out to the doctors that were continuing to prescribe it. When you add all of these things up, you create a mosaic. But most people, it's too uncomfortable for them. They don't have the time to do it, whatever the case is, whatever excuses that they make. And then people say, well, I know people who died. Well, how is it that people go into the hospital and they die from COVID? Well, in many cases, obviously, if there was a quote-unquote accidental release from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which these congressional hearings are pushing that narrative, whether you believe it was an intentional release or it was an accidental release, it doesn't matter. They had the solution in place long in advance. Long in advance. So you start laying out, helping to fill the gaps in their imagination. How it's possible, because of the money, because of, control, because of the eugenics agenda, the technical, why was it some people died and some people didn't from the vaccine? Well, look, if you understand anything about the manufacturing processes, and they were able to skip through all of those in the safety trials and clinical trials as a result of this structure that they have set up over the years to avoid liability and make the things that they were doing lawful under emergency use authorizations and things of that nature. If you understand the history of that stuff, then it becomes clear, and it's not so unimaginable anymore, that our own government is complicit in the murders of its own citizens. It's happened throughout history, and don't think ours is any more benevolent. You're naive if you do, and the time for naivety is over. Put on your big boy and your big girl underwear, your pants, and accept the reality of what's occurring before it's too late, and vow to do something about it. And I've talked about solutions before too. First one's to stop lying to yourself. Stop pretending that the world is one way rather than how it really is. Learn how to think. Use the TRIVIUM method that I talked about, and then decide, where your line in the sand is, like I had mentioned in the last video, particularly if you're in the military and law enforcement. Figure out where your line in the sand is. You know, what laws, you know, you used to have discretion in terms of what laws you enforce. There are thousands of them on the books. You didn't enforce all the laws. You had discretion about which laws you did enforce. And you made sure that it was important that they didn't conflict with the Constitution. You know, it's time to get back to that. It's time to claw back. You know, for those of you that believe that in minimalist government, well, yeah, government's gotten so big and out of control, you know, but we do need a little bit of government. You know, we call them minimalists. The ones that totally believe in government are obviously statists and believe in the illegitimate authority of government. You know. Anyway, I don't want to go on too much longer. Sun's starting to go down. It's a beautiful, beautiful night. I just wanted to share with everyone that my eye's doing better. I am healing physically. I am healing emotionally. And the toll that some of the things that I've been, you know, doing has taken on me. I'm self-aware. You know, when I'm starting to get into that slump and realize the impact that some of the things I was doing was having on me. And when that happens, it's, you know, for me, it's time to get back to nature, to get out here. And we've had an opportunity to watch, you know, the behavior of animals like we always do, and observe, and just, you know, not have cell phones. You know, we didn't even listen to music, any of that. Just sat and watched and observed birds, squirrels, deer. Saw, and you probably could see now, we had a eagle or an osprey, we weren't sure which, caught a fish the other day and took it up into a tree, and got to watch him eat it. So things like that. You know, I do feel a whole lot better physically. My eye is healing, and emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. Just coming out here and reconnecting. Nature gives us everything that we need. I'm asking also that you know, you want to eliminate that myopathy, that lack of imagination. Open up your mind. You know, free your mind to other possibilities. The older we get, particularly, people get calcified in their beliefs. They know everything that they need to know about Christianity. I know everything I need to know about how to be saved. I know everything I need to know about how politics works and how the world functions. You know, if that's the case, you're never going to open yourself up to any other knowledge, you know, coming in. You stop learning. You know, you've given up on learning. You know all you need to know. You know, until you're willing to admit that you don't know shit, and that you don't even know the shit that you don't know. That's a good start, a good place to start. And then learn, you know, techniques to help calm the mind. Quit allowing the mind to govern you, control you instead of the other way around. Offered meditation as an example. Highly believe in that. There are other things that you can do, yoga, all kinds of things. Learn to still your mind. When there are so many ripples in the pond, you're not going to be able to make heads or tails of what's occurring, and all you're going to be having is confusion. You've got to learn to still that mind, just like, you know, this lake out here now is starting to still. You know, that way you can reflect off the surface, you know, and see reality for what it is, instead of all that interference and that static and all those waves that your mind creates, as the desire to pull you either into the past and with regret and guilt and all the things that go with that, or drag you into the future, worry about tomorrow, instead of living in the present moment. that's a critical tool too to develop in order to be able to see the reality of what's occurring around you. Enhance your consciousness, increase your vibration, get out of that state of fear and confusion and up into courage and into the higher levels. But you can't do that if your current belief systems prevent you from seeing the reality or the truth about what's occurring. And you lack the imagination to know that there are people out there that do understand how our psyches work, do understand and have that knowledge and create that power differential to keep us enslaved. And until you learn to free your mind and understand this is what is occurring here, you're going to continue to be a slave, whether it's a debt slave, whether it's a slave to your addictions, slave to your beliefs. Starts there. So with that, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for spending your spiritual currency, that time and attention to listen to the things that I have to say. I appreciate it. Until later, peace, freedom, truth.